Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 10th, 2025, and this meeting of the Sandpoint Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am committee member and Planning and Zoning Commission Chairman Mose Dunkel presiding. Also present are committee members Wayne Benner, Ivan Ramar, Scott Torpy, and Reed Weber. Will Mitchell, Grant Simmons, and Scott Wolschlager are absent. First, I would entertain a motion to approve the approve as presented the minutes from our last meeting on April 7th, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Has been moved by Commissioner Benner, seconded by Commissioner Torpy, or Commissioner Weber, sorry. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. This meeting has been called for the purpose of an update from our city staff and Tischler Bice, the city's development impact fee study consultant, and for the committee to consider and vote on a recommendation to City Council. I will now yield the floor to Community Planning and Development Director Jason Welker to get us started.
Thank you, Chair Dunkel. We are approaching the end of almost a year of development of our new DIF study, which includes the development impact fees, which, as you know, are paid when new development occurs to make sure that the development happening in Sandpoint pays for itself in the form of improvements and expansion of the level of service in our streets, our pathways, our parks, our police, and fire. So this presentation will be from our consultants, Colin and Nick from Tischler Bice. So I'm going to hand it off to them, and they'll run you guys through the presentation that they plan to give to council here in a few weeks and give you a chance to cast your vote. So we'll hand it off to Nick and Colin.
All right. Okay. All right. So good evening. Like Jason said, we're here to present the update to the impact fee study. And basically, so you've already seen this, but we'll kind of just go over the quick 101 of impact fees really quick. What they are they're one-time payments for growth-related infrastructure that are usually collected at the time a building permit is issued. They are not a tax. They're more similar to a contractual arrangement to build that infrastructure with the fee revenue. And they have three requirements, which we call the rational nexus test. First, it needs to be shown that there is a need for new capital infrastructure caused by incoming growth. It needs to be shown that that incoming growth will benefit from that new capital infrastructure being built for short-range expenditures and geographic areas and other benefit districts, just to make sure that it's actually benefiting the new growth coming in. And then lastly, making sure that growth is paying its proportionate share of demand and not being overcharged.
Hey Nick, the slide is I got this screen that's being shared is
Sorry, let me see what's going on here. Let me try this. My apologies. Is that better?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So then, here we're looking at, updating the impact fee study, which was last done in 2012. Here we can see the components and fee categories, parks and rec, police, fire, transportation, including streets and multi-use pathways. This comprehensive update includes addressing costs. Costs have gone up substantially since 2012. We're also looking at updating the provided levels of service to make sure that we're accurately accounting for changes in the capital infrastructure of the different categories involved in the fee. And then we're also looking at the future growth related capital expansion plans for the next 10 years of each of these categories. Here is a short little comparison of the current fees being charged by Sandpoint in comparison to other communities with similar characteristics. As you can see, kind of towards the bottom in between Rathdrum and Coeur d'Alene, with an average single family home charging an impact fee of about $5,300 in Sandpoint, and per 1,000 square feet of retail space about $4,800.
Hey, Nick, can I interrupt you for just a second? This is Zach Jones for the record. Can we just have the record reflect that Scott Wolschalger has arrived? Thank you.
And we're going to be exploring some changes to the program. One of the main changes is we're changing the residential fee schedule to include the square footage of the dwelling unit. This kind of just helps more accurately capture the demand actually being placed onto the system by the dwelling units instead of having just a single family or just a multifamily unit. We're also expanding the development types in the non-residential schedule to include lodging and institutional development. And we are also adding a non-residential component to the Parks and Recreation fee schedule. So again, you've already seen this before, so we'll kind of breeze through it, but just a quick recap. Basically, we're looking at the base year housing, which is derived from the building permit trends since the 2020 decennial census in that top left figure. And then we're also including what's called the seasonal population, which is residents that do not live in Sandpoint full time, but have something like a vacation home within the city limits. So in the 2020 census, about 4,300 housing units, and then building permit data from 2020 to 2024 shows an additional 400 or so units to get us to that 4686. And then we use vacancy rate data and persons per housing unit data from the census to get that seasonal population, which again is that population within the city that lives in Sandpoint, just not full time. And then the same process is repeated with the permanent housing units to get to the people that do live in the city full time. And that's about 9,400 people. And then another component is looking at what is called overnight visitors. And to get this, we're just looking at the available hotel rooms and motel rooms within the city limits. Currently about 192 rooms, assuming an average occupancy of 2 people per room at a peak occupancy rate of 95% for a total of 365 overnight visitors. And then all of that's combined to get what is called the peak population of 11,413, and then that total housing units of 4,686. And then this is the building permit data for 2019 through 2023. About 538 housing units added since 2019, an annual average of 108 units. And then the percentage breakdown for those units was provided through conversations with city staff, about 65% multifamily and 35% single family moving forward into the future. And then, as previously mentioned, the fee schedule does include this square footage range by household. So naturally, we're wanting to figure out how many persons is in a certain size range of a household. And what you see here in the top right is exactly that. For any household under 600 square feet, average of 1 person, all the way up to 3,000 or more square feet at 3.3 people per household. This is done to kind of get around that loophole of an office or den being included within a home and not accurately reflecting the demand that it puts onto the system. And then the residential projections are here. We're looking at building permit data for the housing projections, and then population is based on that housing growth and the persons per household factors from the census. And so over the next 10 years, we're looking at an increase of about 3,372 new residents and 1,314 new housing units, or a 30% increase in growth. And then for non-residential development, we're looking at employment projections, which are based on the Idaho Department of Labor Northern Region long-term employment growth rate broken down by industry type. And the non-residential square footage on the bottom is based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers square foot employee factors. Overall, this leads to a projected increase of 17% in jobs and 17% in non-residential square feet, with about 1,300 new jobs over the next 10 years and 538,000 additional non-residential floor area. And then we're looking also at vehicle trips to proportion out some of the non-residential demand for the fees. When we're looking at residential trips, we're including an adjustment applied to capture city residents' workbound trips that are outside of city limits to kind of try to right size the actual number of trips within the city. And then there's a retail adjustment factor to account for pass-through trips, which is essentially you're starting at point A, you're going to point B, but you stop at point C. And then here, based on that residential and non-residential growth and the trip factors just shown, we're projecting an increase of 18% in trips over the next 10 years, with 4,228 being residential trips and 2,762 being non-residential trips, for a total of 6,990 daily vehicle trips. The first category we're going to explore the update to is the Parks and Recreation Department. The methodology that we used to assess the impact fee is called the incremental expansion approach. And what this is you're looking at the current levels of service provided based on the park inventory and currently existing demand base. In this case, with that addition of the non-residential component to the Parks and Recreation fee schedule, this will be persons and jobs. What this does is it ensures that today's levels of service is continued to be provided to future residents. It can be considered a more conservative approach. However, it does allow for more flexibility in how expenditures are allocated while still not overcharging development. Again, we're charging this on residential, non-residential, and lodging development with a 97% versus 3% split for that residential compared to non-residential. We're looking just at parks facilities and the share of the impact fee study, and only park facilities were included in the capital improvement plan. The proportionate share analysis for Parks and Recreation to get that residential for non-residential split was done by looking at what are called inflow commuters, which are people employed in Sandpoint but not living there. And so we compare the cumulative impact hours per year of peak time residents compared to the impact hours per year of these inflow commuters to get that proportionate share of the 97 to 3%. Here we're looking at the currently provided levels of service for park acres. Tallying up the entire inventory, we're looking at 74.28 acres within the city. With that proportionate share between residential and non-residential, you're looking at 72 acres for residential and 2.2 for non-residential. You're comparing that to the 2024 peak population of jobs of 11,413 for population and 7,656 for jobs respectively, to get that acres per 1,000 persons and jobs factor of 6.31 and 0.29. This is then compared to the average cost per acre to purchase a new acre within Sandpoint for parks to get a capital cost per person a job of $631 per person and $29 per job. A similar approach is taken for the improvements within the parks. What we did was we tallied up all the individual improvements within each of the listed parks and compared the cost for them together to reach 84 total park improvements within the park system for a grand total of $11 million. And again, that proportionate share is applied. So you're looking at 81.5 improvements for residential and 2.5 improvements for non-residential. Again, compared to that peak population jobs to get that improvements for 1,000 persons and jobs of 7.14 per 1,000 persons and 0.33 per 1,000 jobs. And then that's compared to the average cost per improvement from that list of existing inventory to get a capital cost per job or per person of $942 and per job of $44. And then,
Nick, I have one question.
yeah.
Maybe Jason could help with this. I don't see sports complex on there. Is that part of Travers?
We'll get to is this what you're talking about? Recreation centers?
No, he's referring to not the sports center, but if you go back a slide, Nick, and I noticed this too, I've got an email on my screen ready to send it to you.
Right.
We're missing two of our biggest parks on there, actually. So I think the acreage is going to go up. If you go back one more slide to the acreage, Travers Park is only one of 3 parks in what we call the sports complex. And I know the sports center refers to the James E. Russell Sports Center. That's 40,000 square feet. But the sports complex is our 27-acre combined complex that includes Travers, Centennial, and Great Northern parks. So there's actually about 10 acres missing on that table right there.
Okay.
So I was going to email you the details here in a minute, just so you could make sure you get the correct acreage on that table.
All right.
Okay. Good catch, Mose. I caught it too.
All right. Well, after the park acres and park improvements, we're also looking at recreation center space. And here you can see we're looking at the Travers Park Sports Center, the skate park, and the community hall. The Travers Park Sports Center and community hall have a considerable regional demand from residents that do not live in Sandpoint. And based on conversations with city staff, it was kind of determined that roughly 50% of the demand is for residents that do not live in Sandpoint. So that square footage of those facilities has been detracted from the levels of service to make sure that we're only applying it to currently existing residents in Sandpoint. So that leads us from that total of 58,400. After that reduction, we're looking at 35,700 square feet. That proportionate share analysis is then applied again for residential share of the square footage of 34,629 and non-residential share of 1,071, which is then again applied to the peak population of jobs to get that square feet per 1,000 person of jobs of 3,034 and 140 respectively, which is then again compared to the average cost per square foot, which came from the Travers Park Phase 1 estimates to get that capital cost per person a job of $570 and $26 respectively. The cost of the impact fee study itself can be recouped through impact fees. And so what we're looking at here is just the Parks and Recreation share of the study cost compared to the 5-year population and jobs increase, because the impact fee studies need to be updated every 5 years. And that gets us a capital cost per person of $7 and a capital cost per job of $1. And what we're looking at here is the 10-year need based on that current levels of service that we just went over. So over the next 10 years, with that increase of 3,372 peak population and 1,286 jobs, we're looking at a total capital infrastructure need of $7.3 million, or needing to add 21 and a half new park acres, 24 and a half new park improvements, and about 10,400 additional square footage of recreation center space. And here is the Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Plan to kind of compare to those 10-year needs, just to make sure that everything lines up. We see on the bottom right that growth-related cost of the CIP is about $13.3 million compared to the total cost of $23.5 million. And then here is the same CIP, just instead of looking at dollars, we're looking at the acreage and square footage being added, just to compare that to the 10-year needs. And we see over the next 10 years, the CIP is going to be adding approximately 67.8 new acres and 31,200 additional square footage of rec center space, meaning that it meets the 10-year need. And then we need to account for the existing impact fee fund balance in the fund account compared to the growth-related CIP, just to make sure that we're not double dipping and overcharging growth. And so that balance share of the growth-related CIP ends up being 7.9%. And then all that comes together to get to the fee schedule. And as you can see in the top left, looking at those different categories, the gross total is about $2,150 per person and $100 per job. And then applying that credit for the existing impact fee fund balance of 7.9%, You get a net total per person of $1,980 and $92 per job. That means for a typical single-family home in Sandpoint, you're looking at about $4,500 per home, and then about $196 per 1,000 square feet of retail square footage. And then looking over the next 10 years of growth compared to the fee schedule, we get the revenue. Over the next 10 years, we're looking to generate about $6.8 million compared to the growth-related expenditures of 7.3, and that non-impact fee funding gap of $578,000 is due to that 7.9% credit to account for that existing impact fee fund balance. And then here is a comparison of Sandpoint's parks and recreation fees. In the gray is the fees currently being charged, and in the blue is the proposed updated draft impact fees, which will likely change slightly after that addition of those 10 more acres into the levels of service. And so you see here at $4,500 per average single family home towards the top along with Post Falls. The next infrastructure category we'll be looking at is pathways. This was also done with an incremental expansion-based approach. Again, just looking at the current levels of service provided by the pathway system. More conservative again, but kind of just allows for that flexibility in how expenditures are allocated. Pathways are mainly a transportation facility. So to stay consistent with the previous study, we've attributed residential and non-residential development based on vehicle miles of travel. We're again applying the fee to residential, non-residential, and lodging development, only looking at pathway infrastructure and the share of the impact fee study, and only pathways were included in the capital improvement plan. Here we see the currently provided pathway miles, about 11.19 miles maintained by the city. A slight reduction in the City Beach Trail to account for the summer peak months when there's a considerable amount of out-of-town traffic. Then we're looking at a total 2024 vehicle miles of travel of 77,619, which is compared to that total miles to get pathway miles per 1,000 vehicle miles of travel, or 0.144, which is then compared to the average cost to construct a new pathway mile of $660,000. Get a capital cost per VMT of 95. And then similarly to the Parks and Rec share of the study cost, this can also be recouped. And this is attributed to the 5-year increase in VMT for a total capital cost per VMT of $2. Looking at the 10-year need for pathways based on projected growth of vehicle miles of travel, we're looking at about 2.19 additional miles of pathways for a total capital cost of $1.4 million. And then here is the capital improvement plan for the next 10 years. Based off of year, we're looking at a total of 5.63 new pathway miles for a total capital cost of $4 million, 1.4 million of which will be funded by impact fees, and then the other 2.6 million will be funded through other mechanisms. And then similarly, have to account for the existing impact fee fund balance to make sure that we're not overcharging growth. So that existing balance compared to the growth-related CIP is about a 4.3% share, which will be added as a credit to the fee here. And we see that $95 per VMT and $2 gives us a gross total of 97. And then that credit is applied for $4 to bring the net total to 93, meaning that average single-family home in Sandpoint will be assessed about a $1,200 pathways impact fee. Retail a little bit higher, about $1,000 and change per 1,000 square feet of retail space. And then again, compared to the 10 years of growth based on the proposed fee levels, we're looking at a projected revenue of $1.4 million compared to the total expenditures of about 1.5, and that non-impact fee funding gap is a result of that credit for the existing impact fee fund balance. And here are comparisons of the current fees and maximum fees in Sandpoint compared to other communities that have pathway fees. You can see pretty solidly in the middle behind both Victor and Post Falls. The next category that we'll be looking at is roads. We took a different methodology with roads. We're looking at the plan-based methodology, which is looking at a committed 10-year plan to address growth compared to projected growth. The impact fee revenue will offset the portion of the plan, about 20%, as you'll see, but the city is committed to funding the non-growth share with other revenue in the form of things such as grants, for example. The fee is being attributed to residential and non-residential development based on vehicle miles of travel. Road infrastructure and the share of the impact fee study are the only things considered, and only the road infrastructure is included in the capital improvement plan. So how we're finding the vehicle miles of travel is we're combining all kinds of different trip rate factors and trip length factors. For example, for an average single family home, about 1,400 to 1,800 square feet, there's 8.16 average daily vehicle trip ends. That trip rate adjustment, as mentioned previously in earlier slides, of 60%, then again multiplied by the average trip length in miles in Sandpoint, and then further adjusted by 117% gets us vehicle miles of travel for an average single family home of 12.72 miles per day. And then here is a road capacity analysis, just kind of going over, projected vehicle trips and vehicle miles of travel based on those vehicle trips. And as you can see in the bottom right, over the next 10 years, projecting about 15,181 additional vehicle miles of travel, or a 19.6% increase. And this is the roads capital improvement plan over the next 10 years that the city is committed to funding, in addition with the impact fees by supplementing the cost with things such as grants. Here we see a fairly healthy CIP with a total cost of $25.7 million. Of that $25.7 million, that 10-year growth in vehicle miles of travel, that 19.6% is considered to be growth related. So we're looking at a growth related share of the CIP of $5 million. Of that $5 million, which will go towards the funding, there will be a funding gap of $20.7 million, which will be funded through some combination of the existing impact fee fund balance, state and federal grants, URA, and general tax sources. And then again, can recoup a portion of the impact fee study with VMT. So we're looking at $2 per VMT. That all comes together for the fee schedule. So we're looking at a total of $334 per VMT. So if a average single family home at Sandpoint will be assessed a fee of $4,248 and about $3,841 per 1,000 square foot of retail space. Those fee levels compared to 10 years of growth, we're looking at generating that $5 million compared to the total expenditures of 25.7, and that impact fee funding gap of $20.7 million will again be funded by other mechanisms such as general tax dollars, URA, state and federal grants, and so on. And then here is a comparison of the current Sandpoint fees being assessed on roads and the draft results. Seeing with the new draft, Sandpoint at the top, slightly ahead of Driggs. The next category that we'll be looking at is police. Similarly to parks and pathways, we'll look at the incremental expansion approach, which is just looking at the current levels of service provided by police to existing demand. This is assessed on residential and non-residential development. We're using something called the functional population to portion the demand between residential and non-residential facilities. We're looking at just police facilities, equipment with a 10-year useful life or longer, and the share of the impact fee study. And we are not including vehicles in this update to be consistent with CIP needs after discussions with police staff. What we see here is the functional population, which is essentially just showing the amount of hours spent by residential and non-residential share within the city. And so we're looking at a 62% residential to 38% non-residential share. For the police station, we got 5,600 square feet with a total replacement cost of 1.6 million. That proportionate share from the functional population is applied to get that split between the square footage. So 3,472 square feet is attributed to residential demand, 2,128 is attributed to non-residential, and that's compared to the peak population and non-residential vehicle trips in the base year to get square feet per 1,000 persons a vehicle trip of 304 and 118 respectively, which is then compared to the average cost per square foot to get to the capital cost per person vehicle trip of $88 per person and 34 per vehicle trip. And then, as mentioned, we're looking at equipment that has a useful life of 10 years or longer. Total number of units of 209 with a total replacement cost of $662,000. Portioned out based on that functional population split, leading us to 129.6 units for residential, 79.4 for non-residential. Again, compared to that 2024 peak population non-residential vehicle trips to get the units per 1,000 persons of vehicle trips of 11.4 and 4.4 respectively, which is then compared to the cost per unit to get the capital cost per person and vehicle trip of $36 and $14 respectively. And again, the share of the impact fee study can be recouped. So based on that functional split and compared to the 5-year population increase and vehicle trip increase, looking at the capital cost per person of $5 and capital cost per vehicle trip of $2. Based on the currently provided level of service over the next 10 years, the police will need to provide an additional 1,350 square feet of space and about 50.5 additional equipment units for a total capital need cost of $550,000. And as you can see in the CIP, with that evidence storage that they'll be building, 3,500 square feet, it'll more than cover the need. And then the additional equipment for patrol officers over the next 10 years also meets the need. Total cost of the CIP is about 1.2 million, 551,000 of which will be funded through impact fees, and 623,000 will be funded through other means. Again, have to make sure that we're accounting for the existing impact fee fund balance to make sure that we're not overcharging growth. And that existing balance compared to the growth-related CIP takes up about 50.8% share of the growth-related CIP. And so here we're looking at the fee schedule. After that credit is applied, we're looking at $109 per person and $42 per vehicle trip, which means that an average single-family home in Sandpoint will be assessed a police impact fee of $249 and $436 per 1,000 square feet of non-residential retail space. Here we're looking at the revenues over the next 10 years based on those fee levels, looking to project about $482,000 over the next 10 years compared to expenditures of $582,000. And that gap in funding is the result of, again, that credit from the existing impact fee fund balance. And here's a comparison for Sandpoint to the current to the maximum fees. Would just like to point out the main driver behind the fees actually decreasing is the removal of vehicles from the fee schedule, which again was just a decision made because of discussions with staff, to make sure that we're really meeting the actual needs of the CIP. So based on that current and maximum, you're looking, 249 pretty solidly on the bottom of the list, but again, that is still going to be meeting the actual growth-related needs of the police. And then lastly, we have the fire department. Also, an incremental expansion-based approach, so we're just looking at the currently provided levels of service, assessed on residential and non-residential development. Again, using that functional population proportion between residential and non-residential. We're looking at just fire facilities, equipment with a 10-year useful life or longer, and the share of the impact fee study. Again, similar to police, apparatus are not included to be consistent with the CIP needs. Here is the current levels of service for fire stations, about 8,946 square feet provided today. Providing or comparing that to the proportionate share from the functional population, we're looking at 5,547 square feet for residential uses and 3,399 for non-residential. Comparing that to the peak population and non-residential vehicle trips in 2024 leads us to the square feet per 1,000 persons and vehicle trips of 486 and 189 respectively, which is then compared to the average cost per square foot to build a new fire station in Sandpoint to get $194 per person and $76 per vehicle trip. Also, similarly to police, we're just looking at equipment with a 10-year useful life or longer, 60 units for a total replacement cost of $449,000. The number of units is applied to that functional population split to get the residential and non-residential share. Then again, compared to the peak population non-residential vehicle trips to get the units per 1,000 persons and vehicle trips of 3.3 and 1.3 respectively. And then the average cost per unit based on the existing inventory of $7,483 gets us a capital cost per person vehicle trip of $24 and $10 respectively as well. And then once again, the impact fee study can be recouped. Capital cost per person of $5 and capital cost per trip of $2. Based on the currently provided levels of service over the next 10 years, the fire department will need to provide approximately 2,161 square feet of additional fire station space and 14.4 additional units of fire equipment for a total capital cost of $972,000. As we can see in the CIP, that new training facility planned for about 2,000 square feet essentially meets the 10-year need. There is, to note, a new station and a ARFF unit, which are contingent on the Sandpoint Airport expanding to begin accepting commercial flights. But because this is kind of up in the air, there are no solid estimated costs, square footage, or timeline for something like that to occur. And then once again, have to account for the existing impact fee fund balance of about $30,000, which compared to the growth-related CIP of 907 brings us to the balance share of the growth-related CIP of 3.3%. And then we're looking at the total reduced by that credit brings us to $216 per person and $85 per vehicle trip. So an average single family home at Sandpoint will be assessed a fire impact fee of $494 and $882 per 1,000 square feet for retail non-residential space. Based on those fee levels over the next 10 years, projecting revenue of $962,000 compared to just over $1 million in expenditures. And that non-impact fee funding gap of $41,000 is a result of that credit to account for the existing impact fee fund balance. And then here we have a comparison of the maximum current fire impact fees compared to other communities. Again, kind of expected with removing apparatus, especially on the fire side, which tend to be a little more expensive. But based on conversations with fire staff, there's currently not a 10-year need for new apparatus. And then here we have a summary of all of the impact fees together. An average single-family home in Sandpoint will be assessed a total impact fee of $10,777 and retail space $6,423 per 1,000 square feet. And then here we see another comparison between the draft fees and the current. With the new update from the fees, we're looking at a pretty healthy jump up amongst the communities, with Sandpoint solidly in second place, right behind Post Falls and ahead of Haley, Idaho. So next steps would be comments and input from you guys, a motion of validity of the study and move to planning and zoning, which is also you, and then incorporate the CIPs into the comp plan through a text amendment through planning and zoning, and then take this to city council for review and adoption.
Do committee members have any questions?
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Banner.
I just wonder on your population, does that include vacation rentals and ADUs? And would
yes,
the, go ahead.
It includes ADUs and tiny homes, which are, we consider those to be occupied during the peak season.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Torby.
I have a few questions. I'll go back to ADUs for a moment. It wasn't clear to me, how are ADUs considered by category for the imposition or the application of an impact fee? Are they considered based on the dwelling size, as if it were a single-family home of a certain size? Is it a multifamily unit, or is it something else? That's my first question.
They would be considered a multifamily unit, and it would also be subject to that square footage range in the fee schedule.
Okay, so they're not transient accommodations, even if they're short-term rentals. They would not be considered a transient accommodation.
I don't believe so. Colin, correct me if I'm wrong.
Could you, I'm not familiar with that term.
Oh, do we have short-term rentals for ADUs?
I believe by transient,
Oh,
we use transient.
Well, the transient accommodations, where you have,
Is there any precedent for treating ADUs like hotel rooms?
that's it.
well, they would be treated very similarly because lodging, we're actually assessing similar fees to lodging as we are residential. So they're more similar in this case, but still considered a residential housing unit and assessed under the fee schedule, the size units that are shown here.
So its intended use doesn't really matter. It would be considered the residential for the purpose of applying the fee schedule. Okay. I just want to note that if this goes through the way it's shown, the added cost to, assuming these fees are financed, basically, I mean, that somehow they are put into a mortgage of 30 years, that the added cost is somewhere in the neighborhood of less than a quarter point on a mortgage rate. Just
That's
a
an
reference
opinion,
point. How, just the nuts and bolts of this thing, how does it work? We have seen in the past a year since I've been here, or a year and a half, whatever it is, a number of proposals come through, which means there have been applications or even been approvals. If the city council adopts this thing on a certain date, does it apply retroactively to anybody who hasn't yet gotten a building permit, or does it only apply to people who have not yet applied for something like, some kind of approval, preliminary? When does this begin to apply to a project?
So the fees would be adopted, I assume, with the new budget or as soon as the fee schedule is approved. Sarah, maybe you can speak to that.
Your question, however, is when does it apply to the building permit? When we increased rates last time, it was if there was a complete building permit submitted by the date of that date that's on that fee schedule, then they pay the old rates, and then if anything from that date on pays the new rates.
So it's the building permit. It's
Yeah.
not any of the other permits or approvals or anything.
We invoice these along with the NUFs, which are your water and sewer, at the time that a building permit is issued.
Okay. I think I have like 2 more questions. I'm sorry. Okay. I was looking at the transportation CIP, and that one sort of stands out for me because implied in that table is every one of those projects has a component of, existing residents and future residents. It's 19.6 versus 81 point something, right? I mean, all those projects are shared costs. And then they'll have dates. They'll have dates. And then they have money associated with those dates. And it struck me right away that in the first 4 years, there's 66% of the total amount is to be spent in the first 4 years. So maybe this comes in the form of a suggestion, is that when I looked at CIPs before in a former life of employment, consultants put together a pretty useful table of basically cash flow. It's like by year. This is what we intend to spend. This is our beginning balance. This is what we bring in. This is what we're going to spend. This is the ending balance. And it just goes on and on and on like that for 10 years. And you do it for each one of these things because apparently all 5 of these cost centers are separate and can't be commingled. And then you could see if it's even feasible to have the dates that you've said you want to do these projects, because if they're contingent on having enough money from both outside sources, meaning the residents here, the 81% versus the 19%, to make those projects whole, you don't want to present, I don't think you want to present something to the community that says, hey, we're going to do this 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and, we're just not going to have enough, we're just not going to have enough money.
You've identified, I think, the challenge that all municipalities face when it comes to funding infrastructure, right? We don't know if we're going to have the money necessarily. We know that growth may account for a certain percentage of our needs over the next 10 years. This might be the only money that we're likely to have, in some of these projects. A good example might be the Great Northern Rehabilitation Project. We had, anticipated a $26 million cost for that. Several grants were applied for, none of them were received. So I think you hit it on the head, right? If we estimate 20% of the needs for infrastructure is going to come from growth, we can do things like ask taxpayers to support a local option, sales tax to help contribute part of that other 80%. We can write federal and state grants for transportation infrastructure, but there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to deliver these capital improvement projects in the schedule that's adopted tonight.
So I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my follow-up question is, are we to read this, or the public to read this document with these dates as a surrogate for priority? So if this is the only source of money, and you do happen to get $1 million, where do you spend that $1 million? What happens first? What's the most important thing? And I can't tell. It shows like all the money's going to come. It's going to be a perfect world in the future. But if that perfection doesn't pan out, what will the community get for, all of this?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell.
Go ahead.
Small piece of the whole entire road system that needs to be done. This is just the amount that's related to growth. So we also have all of the overlays that need to be done in the city. We have millions and millions and millions more. So you can't just look at this. This is just a small piece of all the projects that need to be done.
But this is different in that there's money that's collected for the sole purpose of addressing these needs, right? We're deliberately taking people's money and can only be used for this, right? So when we're done taking everybody's money, in the next 5 years before we do another one of these studies, and we only have so much, is there a way of telling which is going to happen, or does it just depend on the city council, like whatever they decide that day?
It really depends exactly what Jason was talking about. If we get grants to help fund the rest of these ones, or if we get a resource city tax 1%, for example, that would help fund most of a lot of things in the city for the road projects. A lot of them are contingent on grants, on what you were just talking about. So if we were to get, let's say that in the Great Northern one, if we were to get that, that would then rise to the next level. So that would be a one that might have been in 30, but now has gone up 3 years, because now we have the funding for that, and that grant has to be spent in that time frame. So it is a moving target at all times.
Okay,
Don't
Commissioner
don't have the money, and yes, we could do a cash flow, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to be very little of of the total amount that the city needs. And this is just roads. We also have parks. We also have, you know.
Yeah, I'm just talking about I'm not talking about the bigger world that you unfortunately have to work in.
Yeah.
It's just this. Right.
Commissioner Torpy, I think the short answer to your question is that the decision is made by the elected officials at the time of the expenditure. So in 5 years from now, the decision of how to spend this money essentially is made by those elected officials.
So there's no implicit or explicit promise to do any of these things.
Well, it has to be done within the confines of what the decision that's being made now.
They have a
Okay.
time limit on when to spend the money.
Well, it's a time limit, of whatever, 8 years, something, but
8 or 11 on, with,
but there's no like, 2029, we're going to do this thing. No, obviously not.
correct.
Great questions, though, Commissioner Torpy, always.
If the growth happens, money would be there, the projects could be funded. Or certain projects there would be money that you can allocate to a project, and hopefully the project would fit into level of service to at least stay at what it currently is. So this money is not necessarily to totally fund a project. It should be to help fund a project.
Well, there's some projects that are 100% dedicated to growth. It would seem to me that once we collect enough money, that's where that's got to go. It can't, their hands are tied. It's got to be one of those things. But I'm talking about where there's a mix, where there's a mixture.
Those are hard ones to do. They really are, unless you can find the rest of the funding.
Unless you hit the jackpot, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question related
Mr.
to
Weber.
the projects that are in this document here, this presentation. And I'm wondering how, like, public infrastructure, like mass transit, our bus system, is that considered in this proposal? Or could there be impact fees dedicated to, or is there flexibility enough to actually apply impact fees to, and we talked about this last time, you need to kind of widen the street or add more services. So there's a few dedicated bus lane that could go in, and can that be considered in this phase, leaving that flexibility?
I'd love to hear Colin and Nick's answer to that. I asked them a similar question a few weeks ago, actually, so maybe they can respond to. Colin, is there precedent for like development impact fees specifically for transit? And then I want to follow up with kind of another way to approach that.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for that. At the moment, Idaho Code doesn't list transit specifically in their impact fee enabling legislation. So we have not done that exact analysis in the state. It is tricky because, thinking it through is that some of these transit systems serve populations beyond city limits. And so we have to look at, only the development occurring within Sandpoint, although folks, throughout Bonner County might be using the transit system, and then also look at current levels of service in those items. So at the moment, we're really just looking at more typical sort of intersection roadway improvements and then pathways as well. But yeah, unfortunately, we haven't stuck our neck out, let's say, for transit just yet in Idaho.
So Colin, absent impact fees specifically for transit improvements, walk us through this. The goal of streets and roads impact fees is to fund investments that will maintain the level of service even as growth occurs. True?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, Nick, if you could go one slide down, or to the CIP, I guess I'm missing that here.
So one way to do that is through lane widening, intersection improvements that maintain an intersection that might fall to an F at the D level or something like that. So could it not be argued that using development impact fee, street development impact fee, or road development impact fees to fund transit improvements that promote multimodal transportation and get fewer people on the roads in their vehicles, more people in transit, maintaining the level of service for all those other vehicle users? There's something built.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I agree. I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made. we just have to play within the parameters that state code allows us to. And importantly is we need to ensure, with any impact fee is that we're making this nexus between new development in the infrastructure that we're funding. And it may be harder to do that when we're thinking about transit and transit users and where transit exists and where it doesn't exist and current levels of service. So I don't want to shut the book on it, but just to sort of take a more traditional path that's why we're looking at these sort of more traditional, intersection improvements.
Would this benefit from I guess like a city were to do a study, the current level of service on transit, maybe not at this juncture, this point in time, but in the future, that might be beneficial to consider for the next round of consideration?
Yeah, but I mean, importantly is we need certain master planning or, efforts like you're describing to help justify a fee. Similarly, we didn't move forward with a stormwater impact fee in this study, although we were tasked to at least explore it. But one sort of important item or two that we're missing is sort of that level of service analysis, but then also capital plans that the city would be taking on to fund, to use the impact fee dollars to fund. And, big caveat is similar to the road CIP that you're seeing here is I would imagine a lot of those transit infrastructure expansions may not be 100% attributed to future development. There may be an existing deficiency in the system that we can't use impact fees to fund. And so you would have to, identify other sources of funding to address that existing deficiency. In this case, it was 80% that wasn't impact fee eligible. So sometimes, you see other ways, other revenues to fund transit or stormwater that aren't impact fees and directly attributed to those building permits, but more of, general population funding those services.
Commissioner Torby.
So the footnote here talks about adjusting the costs from the prior CIP from 2018 to 2025 using a certain index. And I remember from the first presentation that one of the obligations city has is to deposit these funds in an interest-bearing account before they're spent. So my question is, and I'm not sure, it may be so small it doesn't matter, but here's the question. Is there enough data that tells us what the difference is between the interest-bearing account interest and how quickly that money grows versus the expected or at least past cost increases for actual construction of, roads and signals and things? I mean, they don't necessarily equal each other. I mean, in the world I inhabit, I don't know why they would. So if there is enough of a difference, it seems to me that we then don't have enough money, because the assumption here would be that it would be exactly the same, that the money that we raise this year that we're going to spend 5 years from now is going to grow in equal proportion with the increase in cost for the signal improvements or lane things, or whatever it is. So does anybody know the answer to that? I mean, if it's not much, then who cares? But if it's a lot, then it should matter.
It definitely is a lot. Per Idaho code, there's only certain ways we can invest our money, and it's definitely not in the stock market. So we do not get the rates that you would see for inflation for the most part. So you are right. There is a big gap between what money grows at and what you see for inflation for the most part. Of course, there are some years that inflation isn't as high, but yes, that is accurate.
So does anybody ever adjust for, I mean, it doesn't look like there's been any adjustment for that here, and maybe I'm wrong. So the first question, has that been adjusted? And if it hasn't, is that just the norm not to adjust it and hope for the best, or what?
I'll just chime in, is that the city ordinance has that an annual inflationary factor embedded in it. And so for the fee schedule. And so next year, if we see, that inflationary factor being 3.5%, hopefully we're keeping up with you know, in relative terms, the construction cost for these roads in those interim years when we do that 5-year update.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
But to your point, I mean, unfortunately, it was, I mean, near 50% increase in construction costs from 2018 to now. So, you know, only within 7 years. And you're certainly not earning 50% on your interest in the bank account over that period of time. But hopefully the city adjusting every year will help sort of keep things in line as much as possible.
I think what you're getting at is if we collect $5,000 today, but that money is not gonna be spent for 8 years, that $5,000 is about half of that, maybe, depending on a lot of factors that we don't have control over. So I think what I'm hearing you say is like, is this enough? Or is that
Yeah,
factoring enough into that?
I mean, you know, we live in uncertain times, so who knows what it's going to be in the future. But if there's a history and a tendency of one exceeding the other by a certain amount, and if the city uses the CPI, you know, versus the construction cost index, I don't know what they use to adjust these things. You know, I guess it's up to us, the city, to figure it out and make sure things, you know, stay on track, right?
Commissioner Torpey, you're raising really good points. Frankly, I think it would take a change in the code for us to be able to combat that issue. So the legislature has prescribed really particular ways where we can invest this money and how we can invest this money. And we have to follow the code.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting.
But it's raising a perfectly good point.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we're
just sort of
get
hamstrung.
speculative in the stock market, but rather that these numbers, these unit numbers of so many thousands per this and that, you know, keep pace with and achieve the objective, you know, 8 years from now. That's all.
So to combat that, if you collect more money up front and then you spend it sooner, right?
Yeah, then it loses less value.
I mean, because right now is the best time to spend the money.
That's a great rule for life in general.
Yeah, because it's cheaper now than it's gonna be. And I just see this project in 2035 at 2.9 million, and it could literally be 3 times that by then. And then our level of service may be also so much different at that point too. I mean, some of these ideas, I mean, I know it's a wish list, but, yeah, I agree. I think, and another topic that comes up maybe along with that is that this other city to the south of us is like a fair percentage higher than us on just about every column, I think. And so is there an explanation for that? Are they out of line, or how are they able to do that?
Colin, Nick, maybe, were you referring to Post Falls? I noticed that they were quite a bit higher in several categories. Do you guys have any context for why Post Falls might be kind of in a league of its own in a lot of these categories?
Except that one.
Yeah, that one's a little lower. What was
Really, at the end of the day, it just comes down to the level of service being provided in these various communities, and so in terms of the CIP for Sandpoint, it's a little more healthy than it might be in Post Falls. The level of service might be a little higher in Sandpoint than it is in Post Falls for roads, but for something like parks, maybe Post Falls has the best parks in northern Idaho, and we just don't know it quite yet.
Yeah, I would dispute that, but
I will say it's really rewarding to see your guys' eyes open to the near impossibility of funding municipal infrastructure over time and the myth of growth actually paying for itself, because it really doesn't. And impact fees are a small legal way to at least make an effort to have growth contribute to maintaining the level of service over time. But cities around the United States struggle with these challenges you're describing, keeping up with inflation, property taxes not covering the true cost of serving new growth. One of the things to kind of tie this into your efforts as the Planning Commission as well is to think about, where is growth most sustainable from a fiscal and financial standpoint? What type of growth is most easily served through city finances? And generally speaking, there's a lot of theory behind this. It's where infrastructure already exists, right? Keeping growth, the infill type development. Our code does a really good job of incentivizing this growth in the closer to the urban core as opposed to the sprawl growth that we see with large lots and subdivisions that require lots of new asphalts and curbs and paved sidewalks that are all going to require replacement on the city's dime in 50 years or 30 years from now. So policies that encourage growth where infrastructure already exists is the most financially sustainable type of growth. And guess what? That growth also pays these impact fees. So if we want to have a future in which we can afford to maintain our infrastructure, we should be promoting policies, zoning ordinances that encourage and incentivize growth where infrastructure already exists. So if you think about backyard cottages, you think about multifamily in multifamily zone neighborhoods, you think about townhomes, duplexes, you think about apartment buildings. That's the kind of growth that is financially sustainable. Large lot, single family development in greenfield, type settings is just leaps and bounds less sustainable financially for cities to support the infrastructure that needs to be put in the ground on let's say a 15-acre parcel for, I don't know, 100 homes or 50 homes versus, the equivalent number of dwelling units on a much smaller area. We're going to be faced with much higher liabilities in the future when that type of growth is what we see compared to the more infill type. Fortunately, we have really good zoning ordinances here that encourage and incentivize infill development.
Good question.
Committeeman Wolfswager.
Nicely done. Has that incentivization kind of structure been studied just so that the city can, and I guess, can these impact fees be incentivized for that infill type development?
Absolutely. And one of the big changes from the previous development impact fee report is that we've gone to this square footage model of levying impact fees on single family development, for example. Whereas a 600 square foot ADU currently will pay the same impact fee as a 3,000 square foot, 3-bedroom house or 4-bedroom house. In the new model, we see that tiered structure where smaller square footage units are going to be levied a smaller impact fee. It's a very simple way to incentivize, more compact development. Correct if I'm wrong. I don't have those numbers exactly right. It's probably not the same 600 and 3,000 today. It's a little bit higher because there are more bedrooms. But moving away from the bedroom and going to square footage approach should create at least some small financial benefit to providing smaller dwelling unit.
I guess the same question goes to commercial infill and downtown versus kind of the outskirts of town as well.
I don't know. Maybe Nick or Colin could talk to that. Is there any? Well, there's very little commercial zoning outside of the downtown area anyway, but that I don't know if our proposed fee structure creates any sort of incentive equivalent to the square footage model that we're using for residential with regards to commercial. Can you guys talk to that at all? Is there any equivalent?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we haven't sort of bifurcated, incentivizing infill, let's say retail or office for that matter. Because kind of the assumption is that, an office downtown has a similar sort of trip rates and call volumes as an office, on the outskirts of town. And then, it's based on square footage. And so if you're downtown, lower square footage, maybe you have less employees compared to outside. And so the fee would be greater there. One, sort of like, what we hadn't really explored too much here is you can, carve out different service areas in impact fee programs. And so have like specific capital plans in like the downtown core versus sort of northern part of the city. And then you'd have different fees, in buckets of money. So, okay, you're in the downtown area, specific projects, maybe half, compared to the other area. But that would be a level of detail that we didn't go down in this study.
But isn't it true that commercial is already levied on a square foot per 1,000 square foot basis? So there's already if you're doing a commercial development where, real estate costs are higher and more infrastructure already exists, you're likely going to be building out a smaller office project than if you were to build a 20,000 square foot office building out by the airport or something. So it's already levied on a per 1,000 square foot basis in our current fee schedule, and that continues. So we're actually residential is kind of going more in the direction of commercial in terms of how we determine the impact fee by moving towards square footage instead of bedrooms.
You'd mentioned that a wastewater impact fee or CIP would maybe be in play. And so if the city hits 10,000 residents, doesn't that automatically?
Oh, you're talking stormwater.
Stormwater, yes,
Yeah.
stormwater, sorry.
So wastewater and water are separate. Those are enoughs. From what I understand, the federal rules around stormwater infrastructure relate to your census population. So, there's been a lot of talk of if the 2030 census shows us over 10,000 people, not long after that, we'll be required to, forget this, is section 4 of some 401, the engineers all use this federal language around stormwater requirements. So yeah, it's possible that, in our next go around here, or maybe in 10 years, we'll be looking at the need for a stormwater capital improvement plan and stormwater treatment infrastructure that we don't currently have. We don't have like a system for treating stormwater in the city. We have all these little watersheds that have different outfalls in different places, some with pre-treatment, some without, but there's no federal mandate at this point for that. That is something that's likely in our future. And these guys did look into whether a stormwater diff could be imposed, but before we can establish a diff, we have to have a capital improvement plan. We don't yet have a capital improvement plan for stormwater.
All right. Any more questions?
Another question.
Mr. Weber?
Can you, it's a simple question maybe, but define retail. I think you talked about this at the beginning of what type of projects this would apply to. Is it specific to like a storefront type space, or are we talking larger industrial type building? Example, some near the airport that have kind of commercial component to them, but maybe not. When I think of retail, I think of like a store on First Avenue. I'm just curious what the definition of retail would be.
Yeah, it'd be like big box retail, think Albertsons, Walmart, et cetera, fast food restaurants, sit down restaurants, hardware supply stores, things like that.
But Nick, if a application came in for a building permit for a retail space on a small lot in downtown Sandpoint, the percentage of square foot or the square footage in that development that accounts for retail would be levied a development impact fee, regardless of whether it's a big box or a small mom and pop shop on First Avenue. Isn't that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it'd still be subject to the per 1,000 square foot fee.
Yeah. And also, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about like credits in development impact fees. If there's redevelopment, because we're going to see, there's a lot of redevelopment that could happen in Sandpoint. If a building permit comes in to, take an old historic space downtown and turn it into a new commercial space and they need a building permit, would they not receive a credit for whatever use was already taking place in that location, guys? Can you guys talk to that really quick, Nick?
Yeah. So, for example, if they moved from some kind of institutional use like a library to a retail store, whatever that use was based on beforehand, it would be credited towards the impact fee.
Okay. Or if an existing retail store pulled a building permit to just completely remodel their inside, they would not pay a new impact fee because it's not a new impact, correct?
Correct.
This is only this is for like a new building, an impact.
Yeah, for new or
a building permit is completed. You're not paying an impact fee if you're just upgrading the facility. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
This is for new development, not
specific to development that visitors are going to be going to versus a larger warehouse that might have less impact based on the amount of visitors.
Well, warehousing is really retail, but that's a different land use.
Yeah, right. So it's very specific to retail. Okay. By that. Thanks.
To piggyback on that question, are there different fee schedules associated with assembly versus office versus business? Because commercial uses do vary their impact on the community greatly. So is that kind of accounted for in the study?
Yeah, so we're looking on the right-hand side, you can see the different non-residential uses that we're looking at, retail, office, institutional, industrial, manufacturing, warehousing, and mini warehousing. There are also in the study itself, there are additional definitions kind of towards the end of the report around the demographic memo section that give like further details and like definitions of what various retail or office facilities may be classified as.
That answer your question, Scott?
I have another simple question, and excuse me if you guys answered this in the first meeting. The level of service, do you have a graphic that compares Sandpoint's level of service to these other communities? I see the graphics that compare the fees, but kind of to a question that was brought up earlier, is there a comparison of level of service? And secondarily, is the city required to maintain that same level of service? There have been recent capital expenditures, parks improved. So if an enhancement's been made, level of service has been increased for the current population, would it be reasonable to assume, that infrastructure can handle 3,000 more people? So should it be included in this study?
We don't typically compare levels of service between communities. That's partially because sometimes when we, include a community in the comparison, we're not the ones that did the impact fee study for them. So it's a little difficult to just one-to-one comparison with the levels of service because it might be calculated in a slightly different way in a different impact fee study. And also for the second portion of that, it's tricky. We're kind of just looking at what's currently provided. So in terms of an obligation to maintain the level of service, that's kind of what the incremental expansion approach strives for, is to just match the incoming dollars with the need for those incoming new residents. So that, if growth slows down, for example, parks would be obligated to provide less. But if growth is much higher than we project, then they'll receive more dollars and then be obligated to provide more to keep up to continue providing the level of service today. Does that answer your question?
That makes perfect sense. And again, I'm not advocating for lowering the level of service, but for example, if we provide 4 times the park space already as per capita as Post Falls, it might be a good data point for council to talk about. Because then the last question I had was just a comparison of current single family 1,800 square foot to the maximum proposed, same for retail as well as multifamily, just to kind of have a graphic that shows what the proposed kind of jump is. Is that a graphic you guys have available?
Oh, sorry. I think, let me see here. Is this kind of what you're talking about? Just the overall community comparison?
No, it'd be what Sandpoint's current impact fees are versus the maximum proposed.
Well, that's shown here. Number 6 is Sandpoint's current fees, and then number 2 is the draft fees. This might be a more apt comparison as well. Far right-hand side is the change from the current fees to now.
Thank you.
Keep in mind, this is the maximum supportable fee. Council may choose to adopt something less than this. Given the challenges of funding growth, though.
Commissioner Reimar.
So essentially, we're just doubling the impact fees, just keeping it simple. But which is okay. I'm not arguing or making any comment about how it was accomplished. But did we pick up the monies that we didn't collect for years? The 5% that we were supposed to be collecting every year?
Can you clarify what you mean by
The impact fees, previous impact fees, we were allowed to create an annual increase of 3 or 4%, which I understood from a previous meeting, had just slipped by, hadn't been done when we were making up for it. Lost time.
This last year, we did increase them by like 30 some odd %. But yes, there were several years in there that they was decided by administration not to increase them.
So we didn't take advantage of the 30% that we could have.
We did increase them this last fiscal year by 30%.
And is that reflective in the number that is the
The current,
5,000 change number?
yes. So before that, they were, yes, that much lower.
Any more questions? I would entertain a motion to recommend to Sandpoint City Council the acceptance of the capital improvement plan and development impact fee study and draft amounts prepared by Tischler Bice, if somebody so chooses.
I would so move.
If I could, before there's a motion, just as a heads up, since we'll add those 2 other parks into the park level of service, the park fee will be going up a bit from what you're seeing here. I'd be comfortable, if we have that understanding by the committee here to move forward with that updated park fee, to council, but just wanted to make everyone aware of that revision that will happen.
Okay. Would you amend that?
Well, I was just about to bring that up, so, okay. Because I got it written right here. So I would move to approve with the changes to the parks acreage that needs to be updated.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? Be a roll call vote?
Mr. Torby?
Was that me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Aye.
Mr. Ramar?
Aye.
Mr. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Benner?
Yes.
Mr. Dunkel?
Yes.
Mr. Wolfschlager?
I get to abstain. Can I?
No.
No. You can vote no. No.
Mr. Chairman, motion passes.
With no further business, unless somebody has something pressing that they need to bring up, which I don't hear anything. No further business before the committee. The meeting is now adjourned at 6:51 p.m. 6:51, sorry.
Thank you, Nick and Colin.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening.
Thanks, guys.